There is a small thing that happens on a person's face, and I have spent 30 years learning to read it. I call it the flinch. It is the half a second when somebody who has decided you are important looks at you for the first time, takes in your face, your skin, the particular shade of you, and quietly moves you from one box to another, from somebody to nobody, from the woman in charge to the woman who fetches. It is not loud. Most people who do it do not even know they are doing it, but I see it every single time, because I have built an entire career in rooms full of people who flinch when they look at me. And on a warm spring afternoon this year, in the grandest house in Charleston, South Carolina, a man flinched at me, and it cost him $12 million, and the only thing he had ever truly wanted. Let me tell you how. My name is Adrienne Sterling. I am 49 years old, and I am the most successful luxury real estate broker in the city of Charleston. I sell the houses that do not have prices on the listing, because if you have to ask, the house is not for you. I have sold houses that sat dead on the market for 2 years under other brokers, sold them in a single month, because I do not sell square footage. I sell the life a person is going to live inside the walls. I can walk a buyer into a cold, empty mansion and make them feel their future grandchildren running down the staircase. That is the gift. Anybody can read you the features off a sheet. I sell people the version of themselves they have been quietly dreaming of. And I do it honestly, which is rarer than you would think, because I will also tell a buyer the truth when a house is wrong for them, and tell a seller the truth when their price is a fantasy. In a business built on telling people what they want to hear, being the broker who tells the truth turned out to be the rarest luxury of all. The wealthy of Charleston learned, slowly, that they could not trust the men who flattered them, and that they could trust the woman who would look them dead in the eye and say, no. This one is not right for you. Keep looking. Honesty, it turns out, is the most expensive thing money can buy, and I was the only one in town selling it. And I am a Black woman, which means that I have closed 9-figure deals in rooms where the people across the table assumed, right up until I opened my mouth, that I was there to refill the water. Before I go on, let me ask the people listening tonight something, and I will be reading every answer. Has your face ever made somebody misjudge who you were? Has somebody ever looked at you and decided, before you said a word, that you were less than you are? Tell me in the comments what happened, and tell me what it cost them when they found out the truth. Because I have a feeling tonight is going to be a reunion of everybody the world ever underestimated on sight. And I want us all in one room. Now let me tell you how a girl who was nobody's idea of a luxury broker became the only one who mattered. I did not come from money. My mother was a school teacher who raised me on a teacher's salary and a backbone made of iron. And the one fine thing she owned in this world was a pair of pearl earrings her own mother had left her. She gave them to me the day I got my real estate license, and she pressed them into my hand and she said, "Adrienne, you wear these into every room that does not expect you, and you let them wonder where a woman like you got pearls like these." I have worn those earrings to every single showing I have ever done. They are in my ears right now. They are my armor, and they are my mother's voice, and they have sat in the room for every dollar I have ever earned. My mother did not have an easy life. She taught other people's children for 30 years in a school that never had enough of anything, and she came home tired every single day, and she never once let me see her believe she was small. She used to iron her one good dress on Sunday nights like she was preparing for battle, and she would tell me, "Baby, the world is going to try to hand you a smaller seat every day of your life, and your only job is to keep refusing it." Those pearls were the finest thing she ever touched, and she gave them to a daughter she had decided would touch finer things still. And she did not live quite long enough to see the houses I would one day walk into wearing them. But she is in the room, every single time. I have never closed a deal that she was not standing right there beside me for, in my ears, in my spine, in the way I refuse, to this very day, the smaller seat they keep trying to hand me. When I started, nobody in luxury real estate looked like me, and nobody wanted to teach me. And the listings that make careers, the big ones, the legacy estates, those got handed quietly from one white broker to another over golf and gin in rooms I was not invited into. So I did the only thing I could do. I went where they would not. I sold the small houses, the starter homes, the ones in the neighborhoods the fancy brokers would not drive to. I sold them honestly, and I sold them fast. And I treated a $60,000 house and the family buying it with the exact same care a lesser broker saves for the millionaires. And those families talked. They told their bosses, the ones whose houses they cleaned and whose children they raised, that there was a young woman who would not lie to you and would not quit on you and knew every brick in this city. And one by one, the doors I was locked out of started opening, not because anyone gave me anything, but because I had become too good to ignore. But I want to be honest about the price of becoming too good to ignore, because the climb left marks on me. There was an open house, early on, my first real shot at a high-end listing, where the senior broker, who had grudgingly let me cover for him, introduced me to the arriving guests, one after another, as my assistant. She'll get you a brochure. His assistant? I had found the buyer who eventually purchased that house. I had staged every room in it. I had known the comparable sales cold, and I stood there the whole afternoon handing out brochures and being his assistant, because correcting him in front of clients would have ended my career before it ever started. I drove home that night, and I sat in my car in the driveway, and I did the math on how many more years of being somebody's assistant it was going to take, and I made myself a promise. I promised myself I was going to get so good, so completely undeniable, that one day I would be the one whose name was on the listing. And the senior brokers who had called me their assistant would be calling me to ask for a favor. It took 11 more years, but I kept that promise to myself, and that is the only promise that has ever truly mattered. It took me 20 years to claw my way to the top of a business that was built to keep me at the bottom. And I learned something on the climb that became the whole secret of my success. I learned to read people, not their bank accounts, their character. Because here is the truth about selling a great house. A great house does not just need a buyer with money. Money is the easy part. A great house, a real one, with history in its walls, needs the right buyer. Somebody who will love it instead of just owning it. And you can spot the difference long before a person ever makes an offer, in the 100 small things they show you when they think nobody who counts is watching. Whether they speak to the valet like he is a man, whether they notice the caterer is a human being, whether they look at a woman in a fine suit and call her the help because of the color of her hands. A man will lie to your face about how much he loves a house, and then turn around and be ugly to the girl parking his car. And that man has just told you everything. He does not want a home. He wants a trophy. And he will gut everything beautiful about that house to mount it on his wall. I learned to read the flinch, in other words, and to let it teach me about the person doing the flinching. For years, I let it wound me. Somewhere in my 40s, I turned it into a tool. The very thing they used to dismiss me became the thing that let me see straight through them. People ask me sometimes, the few who know to ask, whether it still hurts, the flinch, after all these years and all this success. And I tell them the truth, which is yes, a little. It always will, the way an old brake aches when the weather turns. You never fully stop feeling it, that small, cold moment of being unseen. But you do get to decide what to do with the ache. You can let it curl you up small and bitter, or you can let it sharpen you into the most perceptive person in any room. I chose the second one. Every flinch I have ever absorbed taught me something about the person doing it, and I have banked all of it. 30 years of being underestimated. into a kind of sight that the people who have never once been underestimated will never have. They cannot see me clearly, but I can see them with a clarity that would frighten them if they knew. Being invisible, it turns out, is an extraordinary place to watch from. Which brings me to the Ashby House. The Ashby House is the kind of property that comes up for sale once in a generation. A great old Charleston mansion, 180 years old, with a garden that has its own name and a history written into every floorboard. It belonged to Mrs. Lila Ashby, who was 84 years old, sharp as a tack, and the last of a family that had loved that house for 5 generations. And when it came time to sell, every old guard broker in Charleston came calling. The men who had kept me out of those rooms for 20 years, certain that a listing like this one would naturally go to one of their own. Mrs. Ashby chose me. She called me to her parlor, this tiny, elegant white woman from the oldest of old Charleston, and she looked at me over her tea and she said, "Mrs. Sterling, they tell me you are the best in this city, and they tell me it like it is a problem. I am too old to care about anybody's problem but my own. This house is my heart. I do not want it sold to the highest bidder. I want it sold to the right one. And I am told you are the only broker in Charleston who knows the difference. So I am giving you something I have never given anybody. I am giving you my full discretion. You find the soul who deserves this house, and whoever that is who gets it, and the rest of them can keep their money." She had written it into our agreement in plain language. The seller reserves the right to choose the buyer on the broker's recommendation, regardless of price. I want you to understand what a strange and beautiful thing that was. In 30 years in this business, I had never once seen a seller care more about the soul of a buyer than the size of a check. Most sellers will tell you they want the house to go to a good family, and then the moment a bigger number walks through the door, that good family is forgotten. But Mrs. Ashby meant it. She had buried a husband in that house and raised 3 children in it, and she had decided that her last act as its keeper was going to be handing it to someone who would love it the way she had. She had looked all over Charleston for the one person she could trust to find that someone, and she had landed on me. The other brokers were furious. I heard about it, the grumbling at the club, the woman, the Sterling woman, getting the listing of the decade. Let them grumble. The oldest, most exclusive family in Charleston had looked at every broker in the city and chosen the black woman who started out selling starter homes, because she was the only one who understood that a house can have a soul. That was worth more to me than the commission, and the commission was going to be enormous. I had never had a client trust me like that in my life. I was not just selling the Ashby house, I was guarding it. And then Spencer Holloway came to see it. Spencer Holloway was a man who had made an enormous amount of money very quickly somewhere up north, and had decided that Charleston was going to be his new playground, and that the Ashby house was going to be the jewel of it. He flew in on a private plane, his people called my people, and on the afternoon of the showing, I was standing in the grand front hall of the Ashby house in my best suit and my mother's pearls, going over my notes, when the front door opened and Spencer Holloway walked into the house he intended to buy. He looked at me, and he flinched. I watched it happen exactly the way it always happens. He took in the black woman standing in the foyer, and his mind did its quiet arithmetic, and it landed where it always lands. And he did not say hello. He did not ask my name. He walked across that hall, shrugging off his expensive coat as he came, and he held it out to me without even fully looking, the way you hand your coat to a coat rack. And he said, "Here, and go find whoever's showing the place, would you? And tell them Mr. Holloway is here, and see if there's anything cold to drink in that kitchen. It's hot as blazes out there. Go find whoever's showing the place." I was whoever was showing the place. I had the only set of keys to that house in my purse. Now, I have to tell you what I did, because it is the part that matters. and it is the part I am not entirely proud of. And it is the part somebody listening needs to hear. I took his coat. I did. After 30 years, the instinct is so deep it moves your arms before your pride can stop them. 30 years of swallowing the flinch to keep a client comfortable. 30 years of being the bigger person so I could close the deal and feed my family. 30 years of a survival reflex that says, do not make it weird. Do not make him uncomfortable. Do not be the difficult one. Just get through it. I took that man's coat and I draped it over my arm. And a voice in me, a tired, old, practical voice, started talking fast. It said, Adrian, this man is about to make the biggest offer this house will ever see. 12, maybe $14 million. Your commission on that is more money than your mother made in her entire life. So you smile, and you fetch his cold drink, and at the right moment, you gently reveal who you are, and you laugh it off, and you make him comfortable, and you take that check to the bank. That is the smart play. That is the grown-up play. Swallow it one more time. I need you to understand how strong that voice is, because it is not cowardice. It is survival, and there is a world of difference between the two. Every Black woman who has ever had to make a living in a white room knows that voice. It is the voice that has kept us employed and kept us fed and kept us alive for a very long time. It is the voice that says, do not give them a reason. Do not be the angry one. Do not let your dignity cost your children their dinner. I had obeyed that voice for 30 years, and it had not been wrong to obey it. Not always. Sometimes swallowing it is exactly how you live to fight another day. But I was 49 years old, standing in the grandest house in Charleston with a stranger's coat over my arm, and I had finally arrived at the one place that old voice could not follow me, because I did not need Spencer Holloway's money. I had my own. I had spent 30 years getting myself to the exact spot where I could afford, at last, to be fully myself in a room full of people who would rather I was not, and a freedom you have bled 30 years for. And then refuse to use is not freedom at all. It is just a nicer cage. And I almost did. I stood there in that 180-year-old hall with a stranger's coat over my arm, about to go get him a glass of sweet tea in a house where I held the only keys, and I felt my mother's pearls in my ears. And I thought about what she said. You wear these into every room that does not expect you, not so you can carry their coats more comfortably, so they can wonder, so you can stand there in your worth and let them be the ones who have to adjust. And while I was standing there deciding who I was going to be, Spencer Holloway gave me the answer to the only question that actually mattered. Because he had not come alone, there was a caterer setting up in the dining room, a young man, and there was an older gentleman who had valeted his car. And over the next 20 minutes, while Spencer Holloway waited for the real agent he assumed I had gone to fetch, I watched him. I watched him snap his fingers at the caterer. I watched him berate the valet over a smudge on his car that I am fairly sure was a shadow. And I knew that valet, his name was Mr. Roper, a deacon at a church 2 streets over from where I grew up, a man who had parked cars at Charleston's finest events for 40 years with more dignity in his little finger than Spencer Holloway had in his whole portfolio. And I knew the caterer, too, a young man named Deshawn who was putting himself through college one shrimp tray at a time. These were not furniture. These were my people, the people I came from, the people whose mothers had told them, the way mine had told me, to keep their heads up in rooms that wished they were invisible. And I stood there in my fine suit and my mother's pearls and watched a man treat them like they were nothing. And something in me that had been bending quietly for 30 years finally stood up straight. I watched him walk through that magnificent old house that Mrs. Lila Ashby's family had loved for 5 generations. And I heard him say, into his phone, loud, not caring who heard. Yeah, it's perfect. We'll gut the whole thing, rip out all this old junk. The garden's gotta go. I'm thinking a pool and a helipad. Rip out all this old junk. The garden that had a name, the floorboards with the history. He did not stop there. He walked into the library, a room where 5 generations of one family had read by the same fireplace. And he rapped his knuckles on the hand-carved mantel and said, to nobody in particular, cheap enough to rip out, at least. He went out into the famous garden, and I watched him not see a single flower in it. Watched him measure it with his eyes only for where the concrete was going to go. A house tells you who it wants, if you know how to listen. And that house was recoiling from this man, and I was the only person in it who could hear it. And every cruel, careless, contemptuous thing he did right in front of the woman he had handed his coat to, because he had decided I was a piece of the furniture. And you do not perform for the furniture, you simply are yourself in front of it. Spencer Holloway showed me his entire soul because he did not believe I had the standing to be a witness to it. That was his first mistake. And it turned out to be the only one that mattered. To Spencer Holloway. The soul of that house was junk, and every human being in it who he had decided did not matter was furniture. And he had shown me all of it, freely, because he never imagined the furniture was watching him back. And there was one more person there, his wife, a quiet woman who trailed a few steps behind him through all of it, and who, when he snapped at the caterer, closed her eyes for just a second, the way you do when you are ashamed of someone you cannot stop. At one point she passed near me, and she saw the coat over my arm, and she looked at my suit and my pearls and my notes, and I watched her understand all at once what her husband had not. She gave me a small, sad, mortified smile. There is almost always somebody in the room who sees. The trick is to remember she is there, so the Spencers of the world do not convince you that everybody is them. By the time Spencer Holloway came looking for me, impatient now, demanding to know where the agent was, I had made my decision. I was not going to fetch him anything. I was done fetching. I set his coat down, gently, over a chair. And I walked up to him, and I put out my hand, and I said, Mr. Holloway, I'm Adrienne Sterling. I'm the broker for the Ashby estate. I'm the agent you've been waiting for. I've been here the whole time. I want to tell you his face, the flinch, ran in reverse. I watched him scroll back through the last 20 minutes. The coat, the cold drink, the snapping fingers, the gutting and the helipad and the old junk. All of it performed in front of the one woman in Charleston who held the keys to the thing he wanted. And I watched the blood leave his face. He started to laugh, that big recovery laugh men like him have. And he said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I just assumed, you should have said something." You should have said something. As if my standing in that hall in a suit and pearls had not been saying something the entire time. As if being mistaken for the help were a thing I had done to him. I did not embarrass him. I want you to notice that, because it matters. I had every right to. I could have done it loudly, in front of his wife, in front of the caterer he had been so ugly to. And a younger version of me, the one doing the math in the driveway, might have. But I have learned that the most powerful thing you can do to a man who expected you to be small is to be completely, unshakably gracious while you take from him the one thing he wanted most. Cruelty would have let him make me the villain of his story, the bitter woman who lost him his deal. Grace gave him nowhere at all to hide. There would be no version of this afternoon he could tell at his club where he came out the wronged party, because I never once raised my voice, never once was anything but perfectly, professionally kind. right up until the moment I closed the door gently on the back of him. And here is where the story turns, and where I need every woman listening to lean in, because this is the part they never see coming. A lesser moment would have ended with me correcting him and then selling him the house anyway and taking the check. That is the moment they expect, the one where the help reveals she is the boss and everybody has a good laugh and the rich man still gets what he wants because the rich man always gets what he wants. But that is not what happened because of what Mrs. Lila Ashby had given me: discretion. I did not raise my voice. I have never had to. I said, "Mr. Holloway, I appreciate you coming, but I should be clear about how this sale works. Mrs. Ashby isn't selling to the highest bidder. She's given me the authority to recommend the buyer, and her instruction was simple. She wants this house to go to someone who will love it. So I've spent the last 20 minutes learning a great deal about how you'd care for it, and I don't think this house is the right fit for you. I'll see you out." The richest man to walk into Charleston in a decade stood in that hall with his mouth open. He sputtered. He named a number so large it would have changed my life, and he said it the way you slap money on a counter. And I told him, gently, that the house was not for sale to him at any price, because the woman who owned it had asked me to protect it. And protecting it meant keeping it out of the hands of a man who called her family's history old junk. And then I picked his coat up off the chair, and I handed it back to him, and I said, "You'll want this. It's still hot as blazes out there." And I walked him to the door of the house he could not buy, and I held it open, and he walked out into the afternoon, and I closed it behind him. And I stood alone in that beautiful old hall, in my mother's pearls, and I breathed. I sold the Ashby house 3 weeks later to a young couple, a doctor and a music teacher, who did not have helipad money, but who cried, both of them, standing in that named garden, because the woman had grown up across the street and had dreamed of that house her whole life and never once believed she could have it. Her name was Renata, and she had pressed her face to the iron gate of that garden as a little girl walking home from school. And she had been told, gently, by people who loved her and were only trying to spare her the ache of wanting, that houses like that one were simply not for people like them. And now she stood in the middle of it, a grown woman, a music teacher, holding her husband's hand and weeping, because nobody had ever told her it could be hers. And it turned out that it could. I had carried the keys to that house in my purse for months. Handing them to her was the finest afternoon of my entire career. Better than any commission, better than any record I ever broke, because I had not just sold a house. I had taken a thing the powerful had always kept for themselves, and I had given it, on purpose, with full authority, to a girl who had been taught she was not even allowed to want it. That is a kind of power most people never once get to hold in their hands. I do not take it lightly, and I have Mrs. Lila Ashby and her strange and beautiful trust to thank for putting it in mine. They are going to fix the floorboards, not rip them out. They are going to keep the garden. When I told Mrs. Lila Ashby about them, that sharp old woman teared up and took my hand and said, "You found the soul. I knew you would. That is why it had to be you." And I understood, sitting with her, that she had not just chosen me to sell her house. She had chosen the one broker in Charleston who knew, in her bones, the difference between a person who would honor a thing and a person who would only own it. Because I had spent my whole life being honored by some and merely tolerated by others, and I had learned to tell them apart on sight. Spencer Holloway never apologized. Men like that rarely do. The last I heard, he bought some newer, bigger place out on the water and put his pool and his helipad on it. And I am sure it is very impressive. And I am sure it has no soul at all. He got a house. he never understood that he had stood in the presence of a home and a woman who could have given it to him, and that he had handed her his coat. His wife, though, about a month after, a small envelope arrived at my office, cream-colored, expensive, with no return address. Inside was a single card, and on it, in careful handwriting, just 4 words. "You were right. Thank you." She did not sign it. She did not have to. There is almost always somebody in the room who sees, and sometimes, a little while later, when it is finally safe to, they find a quiet way to let you know that they did. So let me leave you with this. Every one of you the world has ever looked at and put in the smaller box. They are going to flinch when they see you. Some of them. They are going to hand you their coat and look right past you and assume that the size of your spirit matches the size of the box they have put you in. When that happens, you do not have to get loud, and you do not have to perform your worth for people who have already decided not to see it. You just have to know, all the way down, who you actually are, and you have to refuse, finally, to fetch one more thing for one more person who would not learn your name. Because here is what they never understand until it is too late. The woman they hand their coat to is so often the very woman holding the keys. And a person who is too busy looking down on you to see you will walk right past the only door that was ever going to open for them and hand the key to the one person they thought did not matter. I'm Adrienne Sterling. I sell the grandest houses in Charleston in my mother's pearls. And I have learned that the people who flinch at you reveal everything, and the people who are kind to the one they think is the help reveal everything too. And a wise woman watches both and lets them sort themselves, and gives the keys to the ones who deserve them. If your face ever made somebody misjudge you, get down in the comments and tell me what happened and what it cost them when the truth came out. Somebody scrolling tonight is standing in a grand hall with a stranger's coat over her arm, deciding whether to fetch the drink, and she needs to see a whole room of us who finally set the coat down. And if this one reached you, you already know how to find the next. Go put on your pearls, and do not you fetch one more thing for anybody who refuses to learn your name.